How many children are here today? All three of you. That's good, hardcore. This is where you should be. That's great. You know your parents love you because you are here. They want to bring you closer to the Lord. And that's what we celebrate today. And so, I would like to tell you a story. And this is not a story you'll see in a magazine or newspaper. It's not a story that you'll find in the movie theaters or on DVD, because it's too subtle for that. And the story has to do with this little manger scene over here. If you're on the sides and you can't see it, just close your eyes and imagine you can. Okay, we've all seen the manger scene before. But there's one character in particular that I want to draw attention to. It is the one that has the lamb. The man and the woman were traveling to Bethlehem. She was pregnant. In fact, very pregnant at this point, because soon after she would have this child. And so you can imagine she was more tired than she normally would be. And she's more hungry than she normally would be. The two of them are traveling to Bethlehem from Nazareth. That would be like us traveling from here to Hazleton. And they were traveling on foot. And if you've ever been up there by Hazleton, you know Minersville and Ravine, how hilly all that is. It was the same terrain. That they weren't traveling over flatland desert. They were traveling over hilly mountains. And so as you can imagine, they were very tired. I remember when we were little, we would go to Kentucky about this time of year to see our relatives. And we would see the sign, Kentucky. And we'd all go crazy. We'd be jumping around in the back of the Chevelle and carrying on because we had finally made it. What we ignored was the numbers after the word Kentucky that said 300 miles. We were just so happy to be there. And so you can imagine Mary and Joseph maybe seeing the spires, maybe seeing the little temple or synagogue there, that they were so happy to be so close. Well, they finally arrive, and there is no room anywhere. It was much like the 5 o'clock Mass here last night. There's no room to sit or to stand or to move, regardless of where you were. There's nowhere to park. And the same thing was true. Everyone was coming back to Bethlehem because they had to be registered. There's no room anywhere. Now here is Joseph with his beloved wife who is pregnant, and she's getting ready to give birth, and he can't find a single room. What kind of husband is he? What kind of father would he have been? And so he tries. He goes to the first door and he knocks very loudly, and then he listens. And there's nothing. Not even a stirring within. He doesn't even want to look back at Mary for fear of the disappointment that might be on her face. And so they walk to the next door, and again he pounds on the door and listens. And there's no stirring from within. He looks back at Mary, and she smiles her simple smile. And they continue on to the third door. The third door belongs to an inn, like a hotel. Certainly there would be some room here. And so he pounds on the door harder than the others, and he waits. And as he waits, he utters this short prayer to himself. And then he hears it. There's some stirring from within. And so he waits with anticipation that this might be the opportunity finally to have a place to rest. And a little slide on the door opens up, and a man's face fills this square. And he says, "What do you want? It's late. Everybody's asleep. What do you want?" And Joseph says, "Please, we've traveled very far. We just need a place to rest. Just a place to stay for the night." And the man said, "Everybody's tired. Everybody's traveled. There's no room. Good night." And he goes to slide shut that little door, and St. Joseph puts his hand in there and says, "Please, my wife is pregnant. If you can find a place just for her, she'll sleep on a windowsill. She'll sleep on the floor, in a doorway, wherever you have. She just needs to rest. Please." And the man let out a sigh. And he said, "All right, I'll tell you what. Up on the hillside, I have a barn. And there's animals there. There's some cows and chickens and goats. You can go in there and you can spend the night, but don't light any fires. There's straw everywhere. You light a fire, the whole place is going to go up. Joseph was so grateful. Thank you so much. And they made their way up to this barn. Meanwhile, the innkeeper shut the little door. And he said, why does everybody just want from me all the time? All I do is take care of other people. What about my needs? When are people going to care about me? I don't even know who my children are. All I'm into is this hotel. Everything I do has to do with this hotel. I've alienated myself from my wife and my family, all for this business. When is someone going to take care of me? And then he looked up at the sky and he said, and you, what kind of God are you? When was the last time you talked to me? When was the last time you even knocked at my... And then he thought about the young couple who had just knocked on his door. He shook his head and he went to bed that night, but he couldn't sleep. The whole night he was thinking about this poor couple up on the hillside, probably freezing to death. And so in the middle of the night he got up, he grabbed a blanket on the side, and he began to leave. And his wife was stirring. She said, Simon, where are you going? And he left without a word. And as Simon began walking up toward the barn on the hill, he saw that it was dark. He could imagine how cold they must be. And he's thinking about that couple and all the things that had happened. He heard the night sounds, the brook going on next to him, rippling over the rocks. He heard the crickets chirping and the trees rustling, the leaves from the wind. And he walked contemplating how God might touch his life. And then something amazing happened. All of a sudden, the brook stopped flowing. The trees were silent, and the crickets stopped chirping. For this one moment, it's like all the world was still. That something that's so wonderful and so powerful had just occurred, that all of nature, living and non-living, paused in adoration and homage. And then just as quickly, the brook began flowing again, and the trees began blowing again, and the crickets were chirping their way. And he looked up at the barn, and all of a sudden he saw light. And the first thought that filled his mind was that they had made a fire. I can't believe they made a fire in my barn. See, this is how ungrateful people are. You give them something and they take advantage of it. When I get up there, I'm going to throw them out of there. And I'm never going to invite anyone to do that again, because my good deed has gone punished. And as he approached this barn, he looked in, and there was no fire, but light. Light was everywhere. And it all seemed to be coming from this little baby off in the middle, a little child. And he was so awestruck, he just stood there with his arms out. So much so that a shepherd approached him and said, "Here, hold this," and gave him one of the lambs. And so that man there on the end is not a shepherd, it's an innkeeper. An innkeeper who happened to be at the wrong place at the right time. And he took the lamb. And just as everyone else there was kneeling in adoration, all of a sudden he dropped to his knees. He doesn't remember when it happened. He doesn't know how long he remained there. But he felt peace for the first time in his life. And then he saw as the man, who must have been the father, went over to an animal's feeding trough. And he took the trough and emptied out all the food and the bad hay, and he filled it with fresh bedding. And Simon saw his mark on that trough. That belonged to him. He recognized his mark. He doesn't know how long he stayed there, but he knows from that moment forward his life changed forever. That his family became second only to God. That he entered into the temple and he brought his children there and they worshiped together. That he made time away from the inn. He still worked, but he limited it so that he could participate in the lives of his family. His life was changed forever from that night forward. 30 years later, he was with his children in Jerusalem. He went there to celebrate the Passover. And as he's there, there's this ruckus crowd, almost like a riot. And so he very carefully and cautiously took his children over to see what was it about. And unbeknownst to him, a man was being crucified. And all of a sudden, a centurion grabbed his arm and said, "You, get in there and help him carry that wood. He's going to die before he gets up the hill." And he said, No, you don't understand. I'm here with my children. We're just coming here on pilgrimage." And they grabbed his arm and said, "Get in there." And so Simon put his shoulder under this beam of wood. And as he did, he felt a familiar sign on the side. It was his mark. It was the wood that formed the barn and the cradle that held that baby so long ago. And then the man who was condemned looked up to him in gratitude, and he saw the eyes of that child who lay in the manger. It's interesting that God in his own way does grant miracles. And sometimes we're going to be faced with some burdens that we didn't ask for because of choices we've made or the choices of others around us have made. That we will have some burden to bear. And regardless of how we live our life, at times we will have to lift the cross that does not belong to us. But when we do that, let us remember this humble innkeeper. Because on a cold night in Bethlehem, because he was willing to hold a lamb that did not belong to him in adoration before our Savior, he was given a second chance at life. And because on that day outside of Calvary, he was willing to bear a cross that was not his, he was given even a greater gift. He was given the gift of his salvation.